Hi, everyone. Welcome to the ASBX 2021. Today, we have a very special live discussion panel, which we call it the space economy, branding, and also fashion. These are very interesting topics, and I think everyone will be very interested in, especially now with the opening of the space economy. We're starting to see a lot of more privatization, lots of industry or traditional industries really want to get involved in the space economy. But often or not, we need help to give get the first step into this ecosystem. So today we have these world-leading experts from different backgrounds to really share with us how they would go about it, and also from their experience, how has that space economy transitioned from before and into the future. So, I'm going to give a quick introduction to our panelists today. Today, we're joined by Ben Miles from RGA, Misuzu Onuki from SPARX Funding, and Mark Liu he's from UTS, and also himself as well. So without further ado, I will first introduce Misuzu Onuki. She has a very interesting experience and background. She's been really active in space commercialization, policy, and strategy. She's worked on a number of interesting projects, from space fashion and space weddings. I'm definitely going to ask her about that one. A bit too late now, but maybe in the next life. So she's right now working in SPARX Space Frontier Fund. She's on a number of committees in the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry in Japan. And to be honest, everyone has such a long list of accomplishments. I couldn't do justice, so I'm going to let them do an introduction, a proper introduction of themselves shortly. Then Ben Miles, he's right now currently an executive creative director at RGA. He has been established a reputation as one of the world's best brand thinkers, and is known for his transformative work with brands and company culture. He works with all these different, these really top tier brands that we've all heard of, like Nike, Telstra, IGA, Westpac, and the list really literally goes on. So he comes to us with a real wealth of experience about branding and how to help companies to enter into different market or communicate their messages across. And we have Mark Liu, Dr. Mark Liu. He's a fashion designer and textile designer, and is a visiting scholar at UTS as well. He brings science to high fashion. He's a pioneer of zero waste fashion, and he's best known for exhibiting his work in London Fashion Week and also in museums around the world. His research explores the fields of 3D scanning to bespoke garment algorithm, carbon negative algae-based fabrics, and 3D printed garments and zero waste recyclable single-use surgical gowns. Mark is a Central St. Martin's graduate who worked at Alexander McQueen before starting his own sustainable fashion label. So you can definitely see we have a really established leaders here today to share with us on this important topic. So I would like to first kindly ask Misuzu Onuki to give us a brief introduction about herself.
So hello, and I'm sorry, and I have no slide today, but I try to explain myself and what I have done. So first of all, I am not a rocket scientist. I am not an engineer. However, I have worked in space industry for many years. After working for JAXA, I have been an aerospace business consultant to promote commercial space. I had several activities about space wear. Now I'd like to talk about fashion in space, a driver for space popularization and commercialization. Space was the last frontier for fashion. Fashion had never been important in space development. Safety and reliability related issues are everything in government space activities. All astronauts wear the same pressured suits for launch and EVA suits. They required very high technologies and have been improved, focusing on engineering, but not the fashion aspects. Also, astronauts had to choose their clothes on board from the same catalog of casual wear according to their mission duration for many years. However, there should be some new elements in commercial space activities. Fashion is one of these elements. We can realize it on spacesuits of SpaceX Crew Dragon. Hollywood costume designers are in that design team. The world's first space fashion event was held at the International Space Conference in Japan in 2005. This was the first ever space couture design contest supported by JAXA. It successfully brought fashion taste into space. There were also held several fashion events after that, including a catwalk show in New York Fashion Week. According to space commercialization, such as space tourism and commercial missions, it is natural to consider quality of life in space. QOL in space creates variety of business opportunities, including fashion, especially for long duration space activities on the ISS and commercial space station, which will be operating in late 2020s. The element of comfort, amenity, healing, fun, privacy, and style will be more important for living in space, as well as basic safety and reliability. Fashion elements will be also necessary. Space casual wear R&D is one of the examples. Space casual wear had never been paid to pay attention. However, space casual wear has an important role and functions for health, protection, stress release physically, personal temperature control, personal health measurement equipment, and conducting daily life activities. Space casual wear has been developed in Japan, focusing on comfort since 2001, and have been used by Japanese astronauts since 2008. These have special functions such as antibacterial, thermal control, absorbency, quick dry, deodorant, electrostatic, as well as good fit design in zero gravity. These are also good selling characteristics in our daily life too. Grabbing the terrestrial market is important. I believe that fashion can be enriched by the power of science and technology. And science and technology can become more understandable by the power of fashion. Fashion elements seem necessary to make people understand and put a charming essence on the message. These space fashion activities were based on this idea. Fashion charms the general public. Space development could become more popularization and commercialization using fashion power. Fashion in space can tap into mainstream terrestrial markets, provide order of magnitude increase in total market size, enhancing profitability and encouraging investments. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much, Misuzu. That is beautiful. And I think it really echoes a lot of the sentiments and focus that we're going to talk about today. I think those are very important issues that no one's really looked at or addressed. So it's really amazing that we're starting to have these conversations, and I'm very excited about the future of space fashion and also in how it plays a role in our daily life. Thank you so much. Okay, next I'd like to ask Ben to give an introduction about himself and his experiences.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to start by saying thank you for inviting us to be here. I think it's such an exciting topic to discuss, and it is the great unknown. How we move forward in the future. I think there's so many exciting possibilities. I'll probably just give you a little bit of a breakdown around RGA, just for context, for people out there that might not know who RGA are, so that we can it might help shape some of the things and the discussion points. So I lead the brand component of RGA. RGA is a global business that is born out of technology and innovation. But over the years, we constantly developed. So we're a combination of brand, experience, and technology. And we talk about the intersectionality, these intersections coming together, which leads to innovation. And when we start to talk about the future of space and how people experience it, the brands they interact with and the technology they use, it's really interesting to start to think about those products and services that actually unite and bring people together as we navigate and that democratization of space. In terms of when we think about innovation, we talk about innovation coming from different ethnicities, backgrounds, that diversity of thought. And then when we start to think about space, that innovation and diversity becomes even more exciting. How important it is for people to come together and collaborate, regardless of where you've come from, because you're in a new world, a universe beyond your world. At RGA, there's 1,600 staff across the globe, but we operate through the lens of one RGA. And we have an 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule means that as a business, we're never 100% finished. And I love that, again, when we start to think about space. How can any brand or any industry that moves into space be 100% finished? Because, again, we're in this new universe of unknown. So I think that principle is really exciting when we start to think about space, that 80-20. We're never quite finished. We're always learning and understanding how to continue to move forward. And one of the things that underpins RGA is design and technology, those two things coming together. When we think about space, it's very practical, it's reliable, it's sophisticated. And that being predictable is really important. But actually, as we move forward, how do we use design to embed those unique and spontaneous moments that create smiles where people might need that emotion more than ever? And again, we believe brand is an operating system. And I think the operating system, how everything comes together, it's the people that you work with, it's the things you do, it's the people you hire and bring together. So again, when we think about space, how do you make sure you're bringing those right people together? We humanize technology through brand experiences, and we believe brand innovation is the introduction of the relevant and new. But more importantly, I think that what's really exciting is our purpose is to build business and brands for a more human future. And as we enter space, that human future is really important around how we're acting for the good of humanity, that it's not just a social tagline. It's actually, no, as we make decisions, as space becomes more complicated, more congested, how do we make sure we're making responsible decisions for humanity as we move forward? And really, that leads me to kind of my last point before I pass over, is that we do need to be thinking about values beyond purpose. What are the values in space that bind us all together? You think about great brands, they understand their values, they know their purpose. So how do we as communities in space share positive values that push a new frontier forward? So anyway, I'm really excited to unpack, get deeper into all of this. So yeah, thank you. That's a little bit about RGA and why I'm really excited about space and the future of humanity.
Oh, thank you so much, Ben, for the introduction. And I think you touched on a really good point. We've come to a point in space where it's about the experience. And it's not only an experience of a special few who's gone into space, but rather how as a global community we can all experience or be part of that experience and have that sense of unity and contribution to the space ecosystem. So I think that's really interesting and very beautiful in itself. So we're going to quickly go through it and then we'll start unpacking these great ideas. So thank you very much. All right, next we'll have Dr. Mark Theo give us a bit of introduction about himself and where he sees himself in fitting into the space economy.
Yes, I'm Dr. Mark Liu, and I'm almost like a traditional fashion designer, but I'm also obsessed with science and turning fashion into a science. And because of people who are so good at branding, fashion is often perceived as something quite whimsical and ethereal, but it actually underlies this like really long history of innovations in material science and innovations in the ability to measure people. And fashion always increases when technology increases, and it's this wonderful phenomenon. So I've always been very interested, in one hand, in understanding the underlying traditional techniques of fashion, and then applying the science lens to them. So I think I was doing my undergrad degree and this was like back in 2004 or something like that. And I wrote about the like nanotech materials and how pervasive they'll be in the future. And I think now if we all have a pair of yoga pants, we've probably all got some antibacterial or antimicrobial stuff. So this stuff used to be science fiction, and it's now become just so mundane that it's part of everything. And I've seen these phenomena happen again and again, where we've been chasing down the science fiction and then suddenly it's here. And then what are we going to do with it? How are we going to, as humans, interact with it and live better lives and experiences from it? So I've spent a lot of time in doing research, and I've also spent some time in the industries, particularly in the sustainable fashion industry. I'm probably best known for something which is called zero waste design, where normally you waste 15% of the material when you cut a garment and sew it together. And if you're really clever with the geometry, you can put them together like a jigsaw puzzle and nothing's wasted. And in the past, that was seen as, oh, that's just a clever thing that you do. But what really underlined that progression was, I was looking at all these traditional fashion and textile techniques, all the tailors with their different techniques. I was learning all of them, but then deconstructing them as if they were scientific methodology. Slowly, step by step, turning fashion into a science about the geometry of the body and how we can best fit it as it moves and changes over time, and exploring the underlying material science. So that's very useful. Things like environmental sustainability. Can we make materials that biodegrade, or can we produce materials that can absorb carbon dioxide in their processes? And sort of navigating both tradition and science at the same time. And this took me to all sorts of places. I ended up doing a PhD in basically applying mathematics to the way clothing is made. And I don't know if you've ever been fitted for something, but I think we've all experienced clothes that don't fit. And it's actually really hard to fit clothing. I think there's a 2009 paper by NASA basically explaining just how difficult it is to fit people and how difficult it is to fit spacesuits. And they've created a scientific paper for that. This is something that fashion designers know for a long time. So I sort of go in and I tease out all the issues where we could enhance space or sustainability practices by looking at those underlying sciences that go with fashion. So it could be developing a 3D algorithm where we can output patterns that better fit the body instead of having to do multiple fittings. It could be developing algal-based materials that absorb carbon dioxide in their production process. Or it could be working with a different discipline. Like I work with a lawyer and we write about how the UN Sustainable Development Goals are gender biased. So even if we get all the laws that we like, a lot of the sustainability practices are benchmarked to these the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So there are deep problems, and I'm very keen on collaboration with different disciplines. And as Ben said, it's like diversity and getting along with people and it's almost like getting out of your comfort zone and inventing new stuff between the disciplines. So anything where space and science and fashion come together, I'll be there and trying to do my best.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I think it's really interesting. I think you have great visions to mix that fashion and technology together, because I think it's all part of the how we live, and it is about how do we improve life here on Earth and the experience, as we were talking about earlier. No, thank you so much to all our panelists for such a great introduction. So we'll go right into our discussion by me trying to tease out, bombard you with these tough questions. I think through everyone's introduction, one thing is clear is that it's not that it's very clear the value of space. It's been for the last few decades, there has been a lot of translational technology that came from space that has trickled down into the market, and as Mark mentioned, it's become something that we just accept and very mundane. But given the scope of the value of space to human society down here on Earth, I would like to pose this question: is why haven't there been more companies or industry trying to tap into I guess space and leverage that as a path, whether for promotion or to really communicate your value in. This is not only from like Ben from branding perspective, but even from fashion. There is so much value, and we do see a lot of space themed fashion shows, but they're just really just space themed. They don't really have any direct relevance for or to space. So I would just like to start off with the question of why do you think why haven't more people trying to get involved in space, and what do you think are some of the challenges that has hindered more businesses or more industry to get involved in any aspect of space? So maybe we'll let Ben kick off first, and then we'll go down the panelists.
Yeah, thanks. Look, it's a complicated question, and I think that there's so many reasons. I think there's fear of the unknown, and that fear of the unknown is not just the obvious of space. It's financials, it's communication, it's why would we go into space? And I think the why there is really important. That it's such a exciting and smart opportunity to diversify big gigantic brands portfolios, to think through the lens of lateral innovation. I'm a telecommunications company, but okay, well, how can I maximize space? We know that telcos are maximizing space. So how can other brands and businesses look at that and go, well, where do I fit in? And I think it's only in the last few years where we're really starting to see with SpaceX and beyond, well, actually there's an opportunity to look at new industries. So now we're starting to think about, well, space tourism. Space tourism wasn't a thing 10 years ago, but all of a sudden it is. And then connected to space tourism is wellness, accommodation, activewear, food. So I think that there's been the constraints of space being for the few. At one point in time, there was only 13 people in space. Now, in the future, when suddenly you have more people, you have a market to talk to, you have an industry to operate in, which suddenly opens up new opportunities for businesses to think differently and understand how they can play a role. But until quite recently, it's not been that. We have the space for Earth economy and the space for space economy. And now it's really unpacking those and going deeper to understand what role business and brands can play.
Oh, thank you. No, I think that really, that is very true. And I think, SpaceX has really, shined that beacon, so to speak, for everyone to kind of follow and say, it is exciting, but it is, feasible and doable. So thank you for that. Misuzu, do you have any thoughts on, how on this?
Yes, actually, first of all, I would like to let you know about the status in Japan in this meeting. Now, space industry has been getting popular all over the world, as you know, the same in Japan. And now, more than 100 space venture companies in Japan, but very not so big number compared to more than 3,000 space venture companies all over the world, but getting bigger and bigger. But the characteristic in Japan is non-space companies have been getting into the space business. This is a very particular phenomenon in Japan. And such as Toyota, Honda, Sony, Canon, and the airline company, ANA, JAL, and even the cosmetics companies such as Pola and Shiseido, and so on. Also, those non-space companies have invested in space startups as well. So in this meaning, it is one of the characteristics, and also Japan is as a result, Japan is the third country after US and China by investors numbers. So this is the status in Japan, and non-space companies get into space stories. The value of space is, of course, and every industry can get into the space business because of the space-based data as a big data. now is a data community and data economy. So digitalization and so on. So every industry need and space-based data as a big data. So this is one of the reasons all of the industry sectors get into space. And of course, communication, more communication, IoT, M2M, and so on. So more communication, just like a mega constellation broadband activities. But especially here, I would like to talk about space itself value, like the space tourism Ben is talking about. So space itself value is more precious as well as a practical reasons.
No, that's very interesting. Because you're very, at the forefront of, the Japanese space economy. Like you mentioned, of course, communication, robotics, engineering. That's very normal. But what are some companies, Japanese space companies that you would that you can share with us that is very different or very exciting that we would like to know? Did you have some example of some interesting Japanese space companies that you can share with us? That is not traditional company.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah, I can imagine, but yeah, it's not so difficult because now many companies is seeking for those kind of activities to step and build the next generation. Space is a very good value added to makes it happen, just technology synergy or so on. Okay. So in this meaning, very high potential to do.
No, thank you. And I'm really glad to see that the Japanese is also expanding the space economy. I think, and hopefully as COVID starts to open up a bit more, there will be more collaborations between all the countries. So no, thank you for giving us an idea of the Japanese space economy. Thank you. Okay, Mark, well, what's your 2 cents into the pot?
I think in the fashion industry, some of the challenges for getting the space industry have become, it's almost like the fashion industry has become very streamlined in what it does. So it does the same thing over and over again very well, and it kind of changes its coat of paint. It hits the point where a designer like almost gives a sketch to pattern maker, and then they run off and they design something, or they probably do it through a streamlined computer system. But when it comes to the implementation of new technology that we actually need, like these new like deep technology innovations that come in, there are less people taking on these challenges. And it becomes interesting where it becomes a collaboration between people creating new technologies and access to those, and when they collaborate with fashion designers. So you'll see designers like Iris van Herpen. She works with all these amazing 3D printing companies, and she has access to all the new technology, and she's printing things in 3D and color with texture that no other designer can even get access to. People are like making pieces of fabric and sewing them together, and she's like using new materials and UV setting them and doing all sorts of crazy things. So she has access to this technology. Or a company like Bolt Threads will reach out to Stella McCartney and they're like, okay, we've made this material from spider silk. We can make this amazing new stuff. Would you like to design a gown for us? And it's almost like when the technology people are in charge and they're inviting the designers to come in to give that kind of luxury element. So I think if you've just got the fashion industry pushing in one direction, that's one way of getting it. But you're also going to see this push from the technology companies collaborating with fashion designers at the same time. And a lot of the challenges are getting depth instead of just the appearance of a new technology. So in space, there's so much to learn, which is very counterintuitive if you're in zero gravity or in extreme conditions. It's also, if you're in the spacesuit or something like that, your life could be in peril if you don't design something properly. If you make a gown uncomfortable, like it's pretty low stakes sometimes, like the client is going to be annoyed or maybe they'll put up with it. But if you make a garment and someone dies. That's not normally something we have to deal with. It's like high stakes fashion, and also the cost. So you can make an expensive gown that you put some diamonds in or something like that. But these spacesuits, they're coming in at like $13 million a piece. So it is, as other people said, like it's the final frontier of fashion. So these are new considerations for fashion, and it's very exciting to see where they'll go.
No, thank you much for that. I don't know, like,
what's exciting, Mark, around, you know, you talk about like $13 million for a spacesuit. And then when we start to talk about the democratization of space and how we need to make everyday wear potentially a reality, how do you think differently about how you start to build those garments? You know, for example, how people's vitals change when they're in space, how are we better equipped to understand the health status of somebody pre, post, during space travel? And therefore, how do we create those garments that aren't just a fashion statement and are actually, you know, at the intersection of fashion and health? And that's really beautiful in itself, and something that can actually be designed to monitor and check. What's your perspective on that?
I feel that it kind of validates a lot of the research that I've been doing for a long time. So designers, it's almost like, okay, what is the most technical thing you could build? Maybe like a tailored suit or something like that. But as soon as I move and bend my arms, my body shape is going to change shape. If I breathe in and out, my chest volume is going to increase. If I eat a cheeseburger, my stomach is going to have a little bump in it. That's just science. That's physics. I can't change that. And our clothing has been designed to only work within certain parameters. We're not very good at looking at changes in posture that could occur in zero gravity. We're not great at movement. So active wear is good, but we could do better. If you look at things like 3D scanning, we're building our clothing because that's how we built them in the past. But what if we're building our clothing from the individual movements of the people? So there's some Swedish designers, researchers who they looked at the movement of people and tried to derive flat patterns based on the movement. So instead of me taking your linear measurements and drafting you a garment and then refitting it several times, the garment was drafted from data. And they use that on little people, you know, very short people, and they have completely different proportions of anatomy and muscle. No one has probably made a native piece of material or a native garment for a little person that way, customized to their individual movements. And if you look at the cost of that $13 million, it's not just making a suit, it's making that suit so many times to get the fit right. So if we could get that fitting better over time, if we could make things adapt and change, can we be slashing that cost immediately? There's so many opportunities, like with the biomonitoring. Could we use that monitoring to then know when we need to adjust the shape of things? People's bodies are changing all the time. It could be their diet, it could be how much, you know, it could be in their cycle, their period. There's so many different nuances, and the intersection of all these disciplines is really exciting, and is where we're going to get a lot of our progress.
Well, thank you for that, Mark. And I don't know, when you start to describe these things, it sounds like the future of, you know, fashion and, you know, space and humanity is more of almost a living piece of clothing, rather than just a suit or just a shirt or something. But it's actually, it has life because it's your best friend. It's like your personalized Siri attached to your body, so to speak. But I think you know, in terms of the technological context, I think those technologies are in existence. It's how do we actually integrate them, or how do we merge them? And on that note, I guess it brings us to the next question of, you know, given that the context of humans in space, you know, no matter where we go, you know, advertisement or movies, you know, the spacesuit has always been that centerpiece of representation of humans in space. So, you know, you mentioned some of the hesitation of, you know, maybe fashion industry diving right into, you know, spacesuit design or sustainable spacesuit. You know, where do you see, if there weren't so much concern, you know, where do you see fashion design contributing to, you know, spacesuits or space activewear? And given that, as you just mentioned, you know, spacesuits are so personalized and expensive as a result, how can we approach more fashion designers to contribute or be involved in whether it be spacesuit design or sustainable activewear. So I might get Mark to follow on his talk, and then we'll move down the list.
Okay, I think it's important to almost like recognize that fashion designers have, at least in America, have always been part of the conversation when it came to spacesuits. So there's the bra company Playtex, or the International Latex Corporation, and they were heavily involved in World War II's development of new technology, but they're also essential in the Apollo space program. And a lot of those early spacesuits were all sewn by couturiers, so people extremely skilled at sewing. And there's this really interesting interplay where engineers, they wanted to be so precise in how they labeled all adjustments, and the sewers are just making adjustments in real time. And there was this real thing, because we almost had two different cultures happening. There's just this like, oh, just fix it in real time, and like, oh, you have to document everything because we have to know everything. So I think that knowledge of looking at how to work with materials and how to work with humans is really important. And there's all these skills that I think engineers can kind of miss, which come down to sort of human psychology. And one of like the funniest ones I can think of is, it was particularly like, it's, imagine the International Latex Corporation, and they're making the catheters that the astronauts have to wear in space. So it's going to fit, like they're male astronauts, it's going to fit around your genitalia, and it's going to prevent urine leaking into your suit, which you could literally drown and die in space. And they labeled the attachments small, medium, and large. And all the astronauts, they refused to choose the small or the medium one, because they didn't want to be seen to have small genitalia, because even though they were astronauts, they could not have their manhood attacked. And because of that, they all chose the large one. And of course it didn't fit, because physics and science. So next time that, like, these guys, amazing human specimens, but they were willing to like jeopardize the entire space program and die in space, drowning in their own urine because of the vanity of the sizing. In fashion, we call that vanity sizing system. So we would have size 0, size -1, size 1 instead of size 67 or something like that. So there's all this human psychology that I think engineers sometimes overlook. And it's like, even when you get fitted for a suit, a tailor will not let you do it in front of a mirror for too long, because you pose and you mess up all the measurements. And then you wait a little while, and then you sort of breathe out. And then that's when I can measure you. And all these crafty things that are valid, if we can sort of adapt those and collaborate with material scientists and spacesuit engineers and designers and aerospace people to build them into our spacesuits, I think we can add all this value. And there are these unsolved problems in fashion design that I think a lot of designers would really love to challenge and explore, instead of just making the same pair of pants over and over again. So I think there, especially with young people, where there's this kind of, I think they find space as a very sort of sexy industry. So there will be new designers coming in, and I think we just need to pose the problems to them, whether it's making a better space diaper, or getting the movement, or figuring out how in zero gravity a suit will work, and they'll be attracted to those problems.
No, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. And I think you're absolutely right. There's far much more, and I think that's the essence of today's discussion. It's how do we go beyond the engineering and put in that human element, that whether it be psychology or experience into it. Misuzu, of your background experience and activewear and spacesuit,
Yeah, actually, this question is very difficult for me, and instantly I can only imagine is a color choice. So more, and color can do something for in this meaning. So and also choice system is also necessary, because of so far only limited company can develop and manufacture the spacesuits. So no choice. So spacesuit is set with spaceship. That's it. But and in the future, especially the commercial space and the space tourists, because of the paying customer, so they can they need to have some comfortable to including choice and favorite color and so on. So
I think that's a very important thing you mentioned, space tourism, because these are people who are paying a lot of money to go into space. So
they need more service, including spacesuits.
Yeah.
Service and hospitality. This kind of stuff is government space activities has never have, because not necessary.
Yeah, and I'd love to just add on to that. You know, the thing that really excites me, and obviously I think it's a long way off, but it's also starting to think about, well, what role can brands have on the design of the suit? So if you think about Nike or Louis Vuitton or Patagonia, they all have very different value systems. They all have very different purpose. But then how do those purpose start to drive the way they would bring to life their spacesuit? So you take Nike. It's designed to, you know, just do it. One of the most famous slogans in the world. But then when you think of its purpose, which is to move the world forward through the power of sport, how do you then, if Nike was to design the spacesuit or the space wear, well, it would all be through the lens of the power of sport. So when you're in space and you need to do exercise, how does Nike bring its brand qualities into the design of that garment? If it's Louis Vuitton that's born out of luxury and travel, it's a really powerful space for Louis Vuitton to authentically play in that world, because travel and luxury is part of its DNA. So all of a sudden you start to think, well, how does Louis Vuitton start to design spacesuits? And it's really fascinating to look at what materials they would use, that intersection that Mark talked about technology and material, and how do they do that? They also talk about themselves, Louis Vuitton, as of scouring the world for the most refined qualities, and then implementing that into the spacesuit. So when you're out of the world, you're wearing the best of your world. And then you start to think about Patagonia. You know, they're trying to leave the most sustainable footprint. And then how does that start to apply in space? How do they start to think about, well, if Patagonia was going to design a spacesuit, it's about the ability to explore, but it's about how to be as sustainable as possible. So as soon as you start to put brands in this design of the spacesuit, you're going to get very different outcomes. And I think there's something really, really exciting about that.
Oh, I sincerely hope Louis Vuitton watches this discussion and support the development of spacesuit. But I think you've touched on something that's very, very interesting, and something that I think most people don't really think about. So that's a very refreshing perspective.
Yeah, because of historically, and the government space can't use company's logo on the spacesuits and something. Even the commercial space, like Virgin Galactic Space Tourism or Blue Origin, maybe they have rule, and paying customer can't use the some and the company logo or some logo on their commercial suits so far. But I think it's getting change, especially the commercial space station. They will have the real estate business model, as well as on the board of commercial space station, and also the same stuff, the real estate business model, like logo type of stuff on the spacesuits too, I think.
Yeah, because it reminds me of the Virgin Galactic. I think theirs is made by Under Armour.
Under Armour, but they asked Under Armour to manufacture the space, develop and manufacture the spacesuits, but the paying customer can't put their sponsor logo type of stuff on the suit so far. But I think it will be changed.
And I suppose it's also the experience attached to that. So if Under Armour are doing Virgin Galactic, well, how do they send the suit? How do they engage with the customer to make sure it feels like a really premium experience? The amount of money people are paying, how do we make sure that every single touch point, the fitting of that suit, the design, the personal assistant, making sure that how do we personalize it? And, yes, you might not be able to wear the logo, but inside the garments, how is it talking to you? What's the tone of voice? What's the language? To really embed that experience. So yeah, I totally agree. I think you can't necessarily put the logo onto something, but it's it's those values, it's the purpose, it's what's the DNA in that brand that can come across to create that unique experience.
I think this is really interesting because, that whole personalization really cuts across to, what Mark was alluding to earlier, is that merge of design and technology to have that, both elements to be able to address those needs and challenges. No, that is really, really interesting. I'm just also very curious, especially, and I would like to ask Misuzu on this is, Japan has always been a world leader in design, whether it be fashion, architecture, or anything associated with design. Do you see more fashion designers, especially the younger generation, being involved in sustainable design for space?
Yeah, and sustainable design in space is not the design independently, but the design will bring so branding or and fashion and also entertainment type of essence too. So lots of new keyword because of the commercial. Never happened in the government space, but because of the commercial, those fashion and branding and entertainment and those kind of stuff will come with design.
Oh, no, I think the whole privatization is really pushing advancement of the space industry, which is really, really great. I'm quite wary of the time, so maybe I'll finish with just a final question for all our great panelists. I'm sharing all these really cool perspective. Obviously, despite COVID this last year, we've actually seen a lot of space activity, whether it be, people going on Blue Origin, Virgin SpaceX, and then early next year, Axiom is going into space. So there's a lot of activities. And obviously, these are more traditional companies. But we also seen, companies like, Estee Lauder, also just last week, Heinz, the tomato ketchup company, also, having that space element, part of their tomatoes was made in simulated microgravity. So, where do you see the value of space and branding? And, what would be your advice if you were to, suggest to a company, how to get into space? What would your thoughts or advice be to give to industry who want to get into space branding? Maybe we'll start off with Ben, given this is your area.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think that it comes back to probably how I sort of started at the beginning when we talked about purpose and the why. Why? What is the connection between space and your brand? Making sure you're not doing it because it's gimmicky. There's enough of that here on Earth. So as we go into space, let's make sure that we're doing things with purpose. We talk about the made in space as a label. And I know there's an existing brand or a business which is made in space. But if you think of that like the Walmart symbol, or you think of it like made in Australia, what is the value of something that is made in space? Why is that enhancing the technology, the fabric, the flavor, the food, the health? So really understanding the why behind bringing to life something through the lens of space. And I think it's that made in space. Is it for space or space for Earth? And then really understanding the why. And again, the values, doing it for the good values, because we've done enough damage here on Earth that let's make sure as we move forward, we try to set ourselves up for future success.
Thank you so much, Ben. No, I totally agree with you. And I think it will give other people quite a bit to think about, why are they just in it for, the sake of it, or is there actually real value behind it? And I think most consumers are pretty knowledgeable these days to really see if it's just a marketing ploy or there's something really behind it. So I think that's very good suggestion. Thank you. Misuzu, do you have any advice?
Yes, in another aspect, and I'm sure that space is a place for branding. So we talked about on this matter, and which enabled to bring marketing and entertainment as well. And I can imagine we can expect to have international trade fair and CES, consumer electronics show type of stuff instead of Las Vegas in space in the near future.
Oh, that will be the ultimate. That will be really cool, and hopefully we'll be able to have a conference in space about space biology. That will be the dream. No, thank you so much.
And lunar fashion show.
Oh, that would be amazing.
In 1/6 gravity, so different gravity.
It will be a very different fashion show. No, thank you. And Mark, your final thoughts on this?
Well, in fashion history, there's a long tradition where luxury pastimes have been turned into desirable luxury things in fashion. So when the motor cars were new, or when aviation was new, fashion brands would make things for aviation. People wear polo jerseys and tops and belts, and no one plays polo except for a very select few people, but it's seen as luxury. When you have all these billionaires heading towards space, it stands to reason that space is going to be a new form of luxury in some shape or form. And of course, people will be attracted to it. And that's going to change the shape of fashion. What I think will be interesting as well is the cost of getting into space is decreasing, but you'll probably see a lot of technology companies who wouldn't normally be in the fashion area. They will probably collaborate to get in some sort of form. So it could be that some obscure company that has developed a better material, or a giant company that has developed a better material is going to go and get their branding in through a spacesuit or something like that. So I think it'll be really interesting to see this intersection of technology and fashion, and who basically puts it together and what they come up with.
No, thank you. No, I think you touch on a very important point. Even today, we see within fashion industry, there's a lot more collaboration between the fashion houses. So I think everyone's starting to realize and accept this reality of cross collaboration for the betterment of whether the brand or the overall community. No, thank you so much to all our panelists today. It's been I can keep asking questions, but I'm wary of the time. But this also shows the enormous opportunities there are, and I think we barely touched the surface of this topic. And it's given us some ideas. Maybe next year we'll actually hold a space fashion event, and it could be a multinational one once COVID is finished and we can have in-person event. Maybe we'll start talking about that. So thank you again for your time and support. I hope everyone enjoyed this segment, and and we'll keep everyone updated, and we look forward to having you guys joining us again hopefully next year. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. See ya.